Welcome to 100 Stories, the Narrative Intelligence Project. I'm Paige Williams. This series explores a question at the center of how we become who we are. How malleable are the stories we live by, and what does it take to change one? Across 100 conversations, I'm speaking with thinkers, creators, leaders, researchers, healers, peoples whose lives have been shaped by profound change. Together, we're examining the stories we inherit, the stories that become identity, and the human capacities that allow us to see, to question, and transform. These conversations are helping shape the emerging field of narrative intelligence and the foundational book that I'm writing about it. This is 100 Stories. Today, I am speaking with Matt Anderson, Imagination Factory co-founder and CEO. His work explores how to create a more vibrant and connected innovation ecosystem in child welfare. I invited Matt to be a part of 100 Stories because he is a disruptor in the child welfare system from way back. He is also a storyteller. And 100 years ago, Matt and I made a film together called From Place to Place about kids aging out of the child welfare system. And so I'm excited to pick up with Matt several years later and talk about how story changed his life as well as the lives of others. And so welcome, Matt.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
It's
good to
almost
have
20
you.
years later,
Is it
Paige.
20? I thought it was
I know,
100.
but it's
Yeah.
getting there.
Yeah. Well, let's just dive in and then we're going to get to all the good stuff. So tell me about the work and experiences that have most shaped how you see yourself in the world.
There are a few different ways that I could go with this question. But I think because you and I are having this conversation, and it is incredibly formative for me, like the place that I'll go is the origin story of From Place to Place, because that story shaped the rest of my life till now in like very significant ways, and it's changed how I see myself and see the world. The origin story is that I was living in Missoula, Montana, working with kids who are about to age out of foster care. So on their 18th birthday, they were going to walk out into the world alone and essentially disconnected from their family and from other loving, caring, supportive adults. And my job was to prepare them for that transition. As I learned about the experience of a kid, some of these kids spent 10 years in foster care prior to coming into my program. They'd been in 15, 20, 30 different foster care placements over that time. And then they were going to turn 18 and we were all going to walk away and leave them to their own devices. And as I learned that story of how the child welfare system works, it put me at an immediate crossroads in my life and in my career. Because I couldn't believe that that's the way that we treated these kids. And I couldn't believe that we were going to set them up for this kind of failure for when they transitioned out of foster care. And I couldn't imagine being part of that. I couldn't imagine working in a system that's what we did to these kids. And so I was immediately at this crossroads of either I pivot and go find another job in another field, another sector, and leave the foster care child welfare system behind, or I have to make some contribution. Like I have to find my role of how do I make this system better in some way so that we're not continuing to perpetuate failure for these kids. So I was literally sitting at that crossroads of what do I do? And then Cody, who was one of the kids in the program that I was working with, we were, working together that day and working on his goals of making sure he was ready to age out of foster care. And he just, stopped me and said, "You probably don't even know my story, do you?" And I said, I don't, which sort of, I was embarrassed of like, I don't even really know where this kid is coming from. And so he literally sat me down on his couch in his apartment and told me his story of growing up in foster care and went through all of the details and took about an hour. And at the end of it, he said a few things that changed my life. He said that my life is important, my story matters, people need to know what happened to me, and we should make a movie about it. And that moment it struck me that, well, maybe this is the opportunity for me to stay in this system and try to make a contribution, try to make an impact. The story carries on from there, of course, but in that first conversation with Cody, we said, let's make a movie about your life and your story and why that matters, and we'll call it From Place to Place. And all of that happened, and 3 years later we released that film. But there's so much in that origin story that has shaped me and my work, how I see myself, how I see my work. But that's kind of where it started.
I'm so struck by I've lived that story with you. We
Yeah.
met because of Cody, essentially, because he
Yeah.
said, "Let me tell you about my story."
Yeah.
And it changed your life. And
Yeah.
then as a result, a mutual friend introduced us.
Yeah.
And then we made the movie and it changed my life. Cody's story changed your life, it changed my life. And then talk about the impact of the film and how the telling of the stories, and we can bring in Mandy and Rafe, changed many things and many lives by simply telling their story. I mean, I've heard this story and lived this story so many times in the last 18 years,
Yeah.
but through the lens of narrative intelligence. Perhaps Cody is even the godfather of narrative intelligence in my life
Yeah. Interesting.
because it shows how looking at a story can transform.
So Cody had this idea, and he had an idea for what he wanted to do, the story that he wanted to tell. Cody and I went to your house and pitched you on this idea, telling his story of growing up in foster care and what the experience of aging out meant to him and how he was scared, essentially. He didn't know what was going to happen to him next, and he wanted to re-narrate this experience and this story. And it's so interesting because we pitched you on the idea, and you're like, "Yeah, this is interesting. I would work with you guys on that, and we can make a 7-minute film for whatever amount of money."
Yeah.
And so we went and raised the money and started working on the film. That was in 2008 to make a 5-minute film. Well, we filmed for 2.5 years and made a 80-minute film. We ended up following Mandy, Rafe, and Micah for 2.5 years post foster care after they aged out to see the story of what actually happens. We were starting to know some of the data around the experience of kids who age out of foster care and how they suffer really, really poor outcomes as a result of that experience. The data was starting to emerge, but we put the story to it with that film. You start with a seed of an idea, and you start having conversations with the right people, and you let the story kind of unfold as it needs to. We never got locked into, we have to make a 7-minute film about this.
Right.
More and more young people, it was just Cody, but then there were 6 young people that said, I want to participate in this project. The more we talked about it, the more interest, and they all said the same thing about why they wanted to participate in this film. And it was simple. They said nobody ever asked me what it was like to grow up in foster care. Nobody ever asked me what this experience meant to me. I never had a voice in any of this, and I have something to say about it. And I want my story to impact those coming behind me. My time is up. I'm aged out, but this next generation behind me, I want to do something to help them. One of the questions I remember we asked was, well, if these are kids in foster care who, quote unquote, don't have parents, who would be their parent? And it would be the government, and the federal government specifically. So let's go to DC. So we spent time filming in DC. We spent time filming in other places. But really, yes, let's follow life post foster care, but let's see what happens when these young people have a voice in Congress. And Rafe and Mandy went and spoke and met with high-ranking members who had jurisdiction over child welfare policy and child welfare financing. This was really the first time that those leaders had ever really heard the voice of young people and heard the demands of young people of what they wanted. And they really listened, and it was powerful. And it did lead to, ultimately, federal policy change. It led to the Family First Prevention Act. It was a major landmark piece of legislation. We're still seeing the implementation of that. It has its real shortcomings, but it was really important piece of legislation. I don't think that legislation would have come to be if it weren't for members of Congress taking time to listen to the stories of young people. And I think it's all embedded in these stories. Like all the lessons learned are embedded in these stories.
The film really talks about the transformation in Mandy and Rafe that happened as a result of being able to tell their story and be heard. But for you, will you speak to the transformation that happened for you in telling your story about the loneliness of being a child welfare worker with kids aging out, and then what happened as a result of telling the story and then moving forward in your life?
The story of me as social worker, I think when I reflect back on it, I do think about what I said earlier on here, being at that crossroads immediately in my career, you know, is kind of how I reflect back on my experience. And then obviously 20 years later, here I am, I'm still in the child welfare sector. So obviously I made the decision to stay and try to create real change. But it's interesting because the child welfare sector is notorious for having extremely high turnover rates. And it's not just turnover from job to job, it's also turnover from I'm getting the heck out of this sector and I'm going to go work somewhere else because I don't want to be part of this. You know, the moral injury that you feel as the social worker is really heavy, but you're feeling that because whether you're admitted or not, you're a perpetrator of harm against the people you're supposed to serve. The system is doing so much harm by disrupting and separating these families and exposing kids to trauma and leaving parents this like gaping hole and loss and grief of their kids being taken away from them. That's so harmful to people. And yeah, whether you admit it or not, as social workers, we're the perpetrator of that harm. So, you know, there are some public agencies, government agencies that can see 60 to 100% turnover in 1 year. And that's usually around 18 to 24 months of somebody working in the job. I made a choice where I was going to be committed to be in this work to try to make the system better for most of my career. And today, that's not the vision, that's not the North Star. It's not about making this system better, because this system can never be what families need. This, like, reforming the child welfare system will never be a pathway to justice for families. We can only make it marginally better or nicer or faster at doing what it does. The vision now is, how do we create alternatives so this system becomes obsolete and goes away? How do we actually meet the needs that families really have? I got to that place in my career because I learned at the very beginning of it that Cody was my teacher. These young people I was working with, whatever I needed to know about the system, I needed to know from them. I've carried that lesson throughout my life and throughout my career, and have not always been as focused on that as I probably needed to be, but I've come back to that truth, or that instinct or that way of practicing that's embedded in that story with Cody, is that Cody's my teacher.
Probably the biggest activist revolutionist I know living, who I'm friends with. Whose stories are you learning from right now? Because I know that you're always in relationship to story and who's experiencing it.
Brian Stevenson with the Equal Justice Initiative has always been one of them. Greg Boyle with Homeboy Industries has always been somebody that I've looked to and learned from. Sharonda Sullivanoff in Washington. But and she represents this, but people that really come from a place of curiosity and a place of humility and then a place of courage. Those three ingredients, as somebody that's trying to lead transformative change and be a disruptor, are really, really important. We need to be very curious about ourselves, about our work, about the context in which we work. We need to be learners. We need to be curious about a lot of different things. And being humble too, I guess, is right in there of we have to have a certain humility that we don't have the answers. We're not the experts. We do need to be asking a lot of questions. We do need to be learning from other people and questioning ourselves. But that kind of mix of curiosity and humility is kind of don't be so attached to your ego, and don't be so attached to the identities that you think are important to hold on to. There's a lot of letting go that's part of who I am and how I work these days. It's got to be balanced too with some conviction and some courage and the willingness to act, even from a place of curiosity and humility and uncertainty. like that can't lead to complacency or neutrality. Like, you still have to have some courage, and you still have to act. You still have to be trying to make an impact all the time. People that embody that are really interesting to me, and I think are the kind of model leaders that I want to learn from, but I think we probably need that in society right now too. There's a lot of entrenched ideologies that want to fight each other. And I think the antidote is a little curiosity and humility.
If we think of narrative or narrative intelligence as a vehicle to change, like we can no longer live within the story that I was living in, and then I have a moment of transformation and I see the truth, and I have to move forward and let the story grow with me, then what a good formula for how to do that: humility, courage, and curiosity. What identities did you have to shed to keep doing the work and keep growing to become the advocate and activist you are today?
I had come to a point in my career for a very long time that, as a social worker, by training, I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm a macro level social worker. I'm a systems change focused social worker. My job is to lead systems reform efforts, at the local or state or national level, And that was part of my identity, I suppose, but that was just part of how I understood like what my job was and what my practice approach as a social worker was. Systems change, structural changes to policies and practices and financing. And I had to let that go for a couple of reasons because, like I said before, we can't reform the child welfare system to achieve justice for families. Systems are a reflection of us as individuals. And so our systems are a reflection of our more deeply held beliefs and values, our mindsets, individually for sure, but then obviously collectively too. And so if we want to see structures within our systems that are fair and equitable and actually serving people's needs, well then you got to start with the people, the individuals. I had to start with myself. So I had to shed a lot of those identities that I was carrying as a professional in this sector to say, okay, what are my values? What are my beliefs? And are those actually reflected in my work and in the results of my work? And who's being served in my work? I came to a realization that my work and the impact of my work was not a reflection of my beliefs and my values. That's the big one that I had to shed, is like, who am I as a professional, and what's my job? And what's the lever of change? Is the lever of change structures, or is it deeply held beliefs?
Can we talk about that moment in your life when you left your big job because you could no longer abide because it was so out of alignment? You'd even gone and raised money to transform, to create change, and then you realized even that wasn't enough until finally you just like literally laid down all the armor and walked away.
Yeah.
Without a plan. What kind of discomfort did you have to get in to become willing to leave a big job, not have a plan,
Yeah.
and move forward anyway? Like, talk about what that transformation required for you to actually create the change in your life.
The way that I've described it is that it was a weight, and it was a tension, and it was what I came to call a values fatigue. So I was being exhausted by the weight or the tension between my values and my work, and the disconnect there, the misalignment between those two things that I didn't realize was there for the longest time. I think I was probably feeling that tension and feeling that weight for quite a while, probably a few years at least, but I wasn't able to see it. I wasn't able to name it and really understand it until I was. And when I was, then it all happened pretty fast to like, okay, I need to do something very different. Part of my job was to run a very large foster care and adoption program. And what I came to see and came to understand and believe is that foster care is harmful. Inherent to what it is, it does harm to people. It does harm to the people who I say I serve. And I am benefiting from that harm, and I'm contributing to that harm. My paycheck comes from that harm. And so how can I not see myself then as the perpetrator and the beneficiary of the experiences that these families are having that are caught up in the child welfare system? And if I see that to be true, then I can't be right with myself. I can't be in right relationship with myself because I'm not in right relationship with the people I serve. There are many things that led to that, but when I saw it, then all of that, like that values fatigue became very clear. It's like that's what I'm dealing with, this disconnect between I want to be in service of people, but I'm actually perpetrating harm on these people. And so then that was the weight, that was the tension. And I don't want to do that anymore, obviously, but like I didn't even want to try to validate it of like, yeah, but on the other side of the house, we're also doing all of this work to prevent family separation and to support families and to try to change things and systems reform. And so I could have tried to justify one side of the house, with the other side of the house, or one side of my job with the other side of my job. And I had been balancing that for a long time, and I didn't know that that's what was like that tension between the two is what was pulling me apart. And so when I realized that, yeah, it was very quick. That was a Sunday afternoon, and Monday morning I wrote in my journal that I've made the decision to leave my job.
As you walked through the hallway of transition, out of that job, moved, changed trajectories. Talk about the experience of writing a new story and a new narrative for yourself and where you're at now.
I left the job without a plan, but I left it with an intention. The original intention was I'm giving myself the freedom to be in pursuit of who I truly am. And so with that intention, then I was like, that's pretty vague in terms of a career move, but it allowed me to like really get to know myself and, reconnect with, different dimensions of myself. So I did like practical things, or at least more practical things, like mapping out the different dimensions of who I am, defining them, giving them a name and sort of a definition and like a self-assessment. Am I really like living this part of myself? Am I fully embracing that? And so I did some things like that were really helpful, like really like a deeper sense of self-awareness around who I am. And that, that started to give shape too to then like, okay, that's me. That's the whole of me. What's the vocational part of me? What's the job, career part of me? So then I gave an intention to that the work that I would do would be focused on investing in the well-being of parents to keep families together. Then that gave shape to decisions that I would make about like, am I going to take a different job, or am I going to start my own thing? Or like, if I start my own thing, what would that be? So then I started Proximity Design Studio with that essentially as like the mission statement. The projects I had to take on had to be about investing in the well-being of parents to keep families together. And if an opportunity came that wasn't that, then it didn't fit, and it wouldn't be work that I would do. And so that gave me a lot of shape. Being in that space still of like in pursuit of who I truly am, I was very curious during that time. I was talking to a lot of people. I was very public in my story of why I left that job and what I was trying to accomplish. I started writing on LinkedIn a lot about, my values fatigue and about my decision to leave and my intentions and my practices, and like just very open about it all. And it was fascinating because my DMs exploded on LinkedIn. And I would literally have at least once, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, I would have Zoom calls with people all over the country of like, I get what you're going through. I feel it too. I don't know what to do. Where are my people? Where do I get some help? Like, how do I, like, what do I, just people in that feeling of like, this work doesn't align with who I am and what I believe. And I think I am perpetrating harm, and, I don't want to, what do I do? And so I learned a lot over a 6 to 12 month period of having those conversations about people's stories and what they were looking for and what they needed. And that, along with just an inspiration around Imagination Factory as a place to turn dreams into reality, was like the initial idea. How can we create a space where people's ideas can become real? That can be good for families. I had that idea, and then like hearing from people about what they were looking for, and it resonated with me because that's what I was looking for too. And Imagination Factory just became like a scratch your own itch kind of business that we co-founded. It led to kind of this new intention around driving innovation in our sector that's focused on preventing family separation and eliminating systemic harm.
The work you're doing is fascinating, and it's a model for many different innovation ecosystems. And what is your website so people can go check it out?
The website is imgnfactory.org.
Okay,
So
and we'll
the
put it
letters
in the show
IMG.
notes. So
Yeah.
for the purpose of this podcast, what I'm most focused on and continue to be curious about is what got you to the place to be able to do this work, to be a change maker, to go after a huge moonshot. So your grandfather may be one of the greatest influence of your life. We had the great privilege of, or I had the great privilege of meeting him and getting to go to Haiti and experience
Yeah.
his generosity of planting trees. So what did you learn from your grandfather? What was the most important learning from his life that you take with you?
Curiosity, humility, and courage.
You learned that from him.
Taking action. Yeah. Somebody introduced him to Haiti and hospitals in Haiti, which he didn't know anything about, but he was curious and he was like, well, what else should I know about Haiti? It's deforested. And that's a massive problem on every level of human experience. It creates problems. And I love trees and I know a lot about that and I know a lot about forestry and timber industry. What if we reforested Haiti? So that's a bold, courageous, big idea to take on based on his curiosity at the age of 80. But he did, and he made it happen, made the project happen. But he had so much humility that it wasn't work for him to do, and he didn't know the right ways to take on that kind of a mission. But this ability to just be humble of like, well, who are the experts? And the experts are the farmers that are working the land in Haiti, and they have land, they know how to farm the land, they know everything that is needed to be known. They just don't have access to resources to be able to reforest the land. Well, I can help with that part. It was amazing to watch him do that, and like the people that he brought together and the teams that were built, and it's a whole story unto itself. I mean, spending time with him in Haiti for 5 or 6 years before he passed, working on that project makes me cry. But like, just like some of the best, I mean, you were there, so some of the best days of my life.
Sweetest.
For sure. Yeah.
Sweetest days of my life too.
Yeah. And like, it holds so much meaning. So there are these small communities, but hundreds of communities are now part of this project. Thousands of farmers have gone through the program, and I think it's 4 million trees have been planted over the years. There's food crops, like it's an agroforestry, so it's agriculture and forestry. It's really, changed people's lives. It's changed the landscape, the environment. Like, there are many forests growing now. Species are coming back to these areas that have been gone for hundreds of years maybe. This idea, what if we reforested Haiti? The impact that has happened from that simple question, it is amazing, and he gets a lot of credit for asking the question and organizing the action at the beginning. But thousands of people now have made that work happen and made that reality possible. But I would say, like, again, like the lessons embedded in these stories are, like when you can find them, it's just like they're these nuggets. But like, the power of asking a simple, compelling question, it's like it changes the world.
Okay, let's talk about that. Power of asking a simple, compelling question changes the world. What are the properties that question has to have in order to change the world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. What do you think? Let's think about that.
The question is asking has to reveal a problem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It has to assume solution.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's the key to it. Like, the question has to tell you the problem and the solution within the question, and asked in a way that, like, it's the what if we did this. What if frame of a question is the invitation in. So it's got to invite. Mm-hmm. It has to be an invitation to see a problem and to, like, be inspired by a solution.
And when we have
But it has to be simple. Go ahead.
Be simple. It has to be understood.
Yeah.
It's compelling.
Yeah.
I'd also say it has properties of stopping people in their track.
Yeah.
Because they're going down this one path, right? But what I've seen in your life is the question has to be so big that you get a lot of pushback, because there is so much system and power and money behind the way things have always been.
Yeah.
And when you say child welfare system can't be fixed, There,
Yeah.
it stops the flow of money, and people get really upset about losing money, for
Yeah.
example. And so that question evokes fear almost, perhaps.
I think it does. And I think it's like it can evoke fear, or like it's that's too big to be actually solved. So, people can write it off for that reason. But it also has to be kind of like sticky enough that even for those who kind of write it off, they can't really forget that the
Yeah.
question exists now. So, like, one that we're working on is, what if termination of parental rights no longer existed? And so the problem and solution is a little bit more vague in that, or like it's inherently in there, but you kind of have to think about it for a second. Like, why wouldn't we want that to exist? If we didn't want it to exist, well, there must be something wrong with it. Is there something wrong with it? If I think about it, there are some things that are wrong with terminating parents' legal constitutional rights to their children. Like, there is something wrong with that. What if it didn't exist? Well, if it didn't exist, all these other things would be in question. And if it didn't exist, we'd have to do something different. What would we do? Like, so it immediately sends people to all those kinds of places, either to like, I'm excited about this because, like, wow, like that, like, or, they get entrenched because they're scared.
Just so our audience knows, most kids are removed because of issues of racism. I mean, harm.
And addiction too. I mean, I think that's, and to terminate a parent's rights because they're suffering from a disease of addiction, and they've lost their legal constitutional rights to their children. Their child's birth certificate is changed, their name is changed. They have no legal access or right anymore. Like, it's as if they didn't exist
Yeah,
because they're suffering from the disease of addiction.
right.
And so now they're in recovery, and now they're living a sober life. Well, you don't, okay, you still don't have rights to your children.
Reminds me of your teacher, Shrundra.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. One of your
Yeah,
greatest teachers.
yeah,
And her telling her story has changed people's minds about that.
for sure. Yeah.
So going back to like, we have to ask the question that can create a revolution. I was wrestling with this issue of narrative intelligence. And why do we want to increase our narrative intelligence the way we might want to increase our emotional intelligence, right? Well, it came down to me to, if we increase our narrative intelligence and we ask a big question and we can no longer go forward without changing our story or changing our narrative or changing our identity, the reason we go through that transformation and change, as painful as it may be, or revelatory as it may be, is for more love and more freedom.
Yep, totally.
Where am I limiting in that thought? Like, what else, why else might we want to change our story, change the trajectory of our lives?
It's a deeper relationship with ourselves. I think it's a deeper relationship with ourselves to the point of, we spend a lot of time working, right? It's most of our lives, really, when you take sleep out of the equation. So if we're building that deeper relationship with ourselves, then kind of the goal of that is then, well, can our work just be an expression of who we are? Rather than a job that we just go and like we do the work and get the paycheck, that might be fully disconnected from like who we really are and what we really believe and what we're really good at and what we really love and how we really want to be in service of other people. Like, our work should be a reflection of ourselves. How can your work be a reflection of your soul? And so I think understanding our narrative intelligence, understanding our own stories, building the muscle. Like, I want to build the muscle of understanding my story. I want to build the muscle of self-awareness so that I can work in a way that's more of an expression of who I am. And so it becomes a skill almost. The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you never expect to sit.
Creating together, whether it was from place to place or films in Haiti or working on another project in North Carolina or Imagination Factory, changed my understanding of the power of story,
Yeah.
both within myself and then as an external force and in my own work. And you and
Yeah.
I kind of both went through this existential change with work
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
same time, where I went from
Yeah.
a tech CEO founder who was really
Yeah.
struggling into what I'm doing now. And you transitioned out of an executive within a very large child welfare nonprofit to Imagination Factory. In the hallway period between that shift of, I can no longer continue this path because it is not aligned with my values, into where we are now.
I know.
I mean,
Yep.
you are a founding member, I would say, of the way I understand narrative intelligence, because we
Yeah,
had those experiences together. And now we
totally.
just get to reflect on what does it actually mean to
Yeah,
change our lives and to
yeah.
change lives through narrative intelligence, through storytelling, through understanding our identities.
Yep.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Based on your experience, storytelling and creating and changing and shifting and transforming, how would you define narrative intelligence?
It's pointing us to the truth that who we are today is shaped by the stories of our lives in a way that we don't talk about a lot. That's not something you learn in school. Maybe in college if you take philosophy or something. You don't learn that in any kind of like formal education really. And then when you're in the professional world and you're taking all these personality assessments and like IQ, like all that kind of stuff, like leadership development type stuff, team building, like it's not like narrative intelligence is never part, like that's just not part of it, right? What we do in school and in work neglects our story essentially. We don't know, we don't realize that our lives are shaped by our stories and our future is going to be based on the stories that we're telling ourselves today. And so that's one thing that I think about. And then what we were just talking about like the practice and the skill of deepening our self-awareness. Like if narrative intelligence tells us that our lives are shaped by our stories, and who we are is shaped by our stories, then like the skill to apply from that, I think, becomes like deepening self-awareness and really building the skill of understanding ourselves in a way that can then be applied. Our work and our lives become an expression of who we are and what we know about ourselves. I think that's probably like how I think about it, as just having these conversations with you and learning alongside of you. The other thing has been bouncing around in my head as we're talking, so I'll say it here because I think it connects to what I'm saying, to your question. A lesson that I've learned over the last handful of years is that our lives change one sentence at a time. There are sentences that we speak or other people speak that if we really pay attention to what that sentence is inviting us into, it can change our entire lives. Cody saying, "Matt, do you even know my story?" That sentence changed my life, right? And but it didn't have to, right? Like I could have been like, "Yeah, Cody, I do." Yeah, like you told me
Yeah,
last
yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've read
Let's,
your case
you
file.
know, but
I've read your case file.
yeah, these sentences are dropped into our lives. And a woman that I worked with for a while in my hallway phase, Brendolyn, she would always say that when your future comes knocking, answer the door. So Cody's sentence was the future knocking. And, I think we can all probably think back to like lots of sentences that were the future, that was the future knocking. And I think our ability to like see the sentence as the future knocking and then do something about it is narrative intelligence.
And if that's true, really come to believe that the only thing that limits me from everything is myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So if you want to change the world, you change yourself.
Yeah.
And you do that one sentence at a time, is what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah, you can do that one sentence at a time. Or you can find opportunities one sentence at a time. That might be a different way to think about it. But yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, everything is possible for us. Narrative intelligence is our ability to like know that and understand that and see ourselves and see these moments in our story.
So I have this wild, audacious dream that me speaking and you speaking these 100 stories creates the
Yeah.
field of narrative intelligence as
Yeah.
we're talking about it. Because sometimes there's a little bit about AI and narrative intelligence, and there's a little bit of this, but I created the first assessment to measure it, and I want to build the field of narrative intelligence as we're talking about it to understand that we're living in a story and change the narrative. What do you think might happen if my audacious dream that everyone understands what narrative intelligence is for humanity? What do you think is possible if people understand that they're all living within a story that they can change?
It changes everything. It changes everything. So I'll say it this way because I know we've talked about Eckhart Tolle before, and A New Earth. Basically, what he's saying in A New Earth is that there's this truth that we don't all see yet, that we're constantly awakening to a new consciousness. And I think that's what you're saying. That would be an awakening to a new consciousness where we understand that we are not our ego-based identities, and that yes, we have an ego identity and that's part of us, but there's another part of us too that is the truth of who we are, that is our soul. Perhaps narrative intelligence is another way of thinking about how we awaken that consciousness, how we connect to our soul and connect to who we truly are. And when we recognize that there's the ego and there's the soul, and we can start to separate those out, then we can start to make very different choices about our lives, and we have a deeper understanding of who we are. And then part of that, I do think it's a recognition of like what's possible.
Yeah, it's like limitless possibility once
Yeah.
you understand.
Yeah.
So
'Cause you
narrative
start to let
language,
go.
yeah. And so narrative intelligence, like that framework, just gives us, I love how you just position that. It just gives us new language to understand
Mhm.
what Eckart's talking about, or what
Yeah.
Jesus is talking about when he says the kingdom of God is within you, or what Buddha
Totally.
is talking about
Yeah.
is that suffering is my own root problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
I create
Exactly.
suffering in my life, not
Yeah.
these outside external forces. The only
Yeah.
limit is me. It also makes me curious because narrative intelligence has to be more than just storytelling, right? Like, story is a huge part of narrative intelligence, but it's also what we've learned and the narratives that have been passed down in our culture and our identity. And I wonder if you would have had so much courage, humility, creativity, and curiosity and generosity if you hadn't seen that exemplified in your grandfather, for example.
I don't think I would have. And
You inherited narrative intelligence through their narrative intelligence. You inherited the narrative intelligence of your family. I inherited
yes.
the narrative intelligence of
Yeah.
my family, good or bad, and we have the power to
Yeah.
change it.
Yeah.
It's an imprint.
That's an imprint, and it's probably in our DNA, but it's also just in our lived experience of what's passed down to us. Our stories do shape us, you know. Having addiction in my family shapes me and has impacted me. And I also have choices to make about how I understand that experience and that impact.
Same.
And what does it tell me about me and my relationship to my family, but also in my work too. So I've been able to make choices of I understand the disease, I understand how I was impacted. I'm not a victim of it, I guess is one way to say it. I don't hold grudges and I don't have anger or animosity for experiences that I had. But that's not everybody's experience of that kind of a story. A lot of people hold on to the narrative of this is what happened to me, this is what these people did to me, this is how I was wronged, this is how I wasn't loved. And we hold on to that identity. We hold on to the narrative that creates an identity. And I have a narrative and I have an identity, and I hope it's working pretty well for me. But I had to choose which narrative and which identity was going to be created out of that narrative. Just because that's our experience and that's our narrative doesn't mean that it's predictive or definitive. We can change the narrative.
You have an MSW and you help people change their narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's clients you're working with, whether it's children affected by the system, parents, social workers, like, that understanding has helped you transform lives. And it's such an interesting thing that the narrative, because you've experienced it, you're an experiential teacher yourself. Matt, this has been such a great conversation. I appreciate all your time and your continued co-creation with me and
Yeah,
love. And I just love you so
yeah,
much. Thank you for
yeah, I
the
love you
impact
too.
you've had in my life.
Likewise. Yeah, it's a gift.
Before we close, here's what I'm taking from this conversation about narrative intelligence. Matt reminded me that a story can interrupt the direction of a life. Cody's question, "Do you even know my story?" became an invitation Matt chose to answer, and that choice changed his work, my work, and the lives of many people who came after that question. I'm also taking his ideas that our lives can change one sentence at a time. The sentence may come from another person, from a moment of misalignment, or from a question we can no longer ignore. Narrative intelligence may be our ability to recognize that sentence as the future knocking, and then decide whether we are willing to open the door. Matt's story also shows that changing a narrative requires more than insight. It requires curiosity, humility, and courage. Curiosity to question the story we are living, humility to release identities that no longer fit or serve us, and the courage to act before the new path is fully clear. These are emerging insights, not conclusions. But I am leaving this conversation thinking that when our work no longer reflects who we are, changing the story may be the first step toward bringing our lives back into alignment. Thank you to Matt, and thank you for joining us today.